I've spent pretty much my whole adult life bouncing between two versions of myself. The one who feels light and energized and healthy and who takes pride in her appearance, and the one who is overweight, sluggish, bloated, and just wants to stay as small as possible. If I'm being very honest, I have spent more time feeling crappy than I have spent feeling light and healthy in my life. It's largely because I've always felt this internal tug of war. Sometimes I'm actually really good at taking care of myself, at nurturing myself and, doing the good things and showing up for myself. But at a certain point, I will always rubber band back into really unhelpful patterns and go into neglecting myself, but without ever fully understanding why, what happened, when did this all start, what is it all about. I mean, I always knew which version of myself I preferred to be. I just didn't know how to make it last. I didn't know how to stay with that version of myself and that feeling and that positive feeling. So for the longest time, basically my adult life, I just blamed it on laziness. I would just tell myself it's because I'm so undisciplined, I'm just so bad at organizing myself, and I'm so lazy. And I mean, okay, to be fair, I can be those things sometimes, but they didn't really explain the root cause of it. They didn't really get to the heart of the pattern, and they bypassed the trauma that actually initiated the cycle. And that came from when I was in primary school. I was groomed and I was raped by a teenage boy who lived on my block. And I didn't tell anybody about it after these things happened, really just because I didn't actually understand what had happened to me. I didn't know anything at that time in my life about the facts of life, so I had no idea about what is age appropriate, certainly no ideas about what does consent mean. I don't think I even knew what it meant to make a baby, because I didn't have any of that information. I just stayed silent. I didn't know what to say. Maybe if I had a vocabulary about it, looking back, I might have been able to say something, but I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything, and instead what I did was just internalize my experience. Not long after that, we moved, and that seemed like a blessing. To change suburbs. We moved to a completely new area, and I didn't have to be around that person anymore. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be that great, because it just meant that new, much older predators came into my life, and that cycle of silence continued. As a kid, it seemed like the best way to deal with everything was just to ignore it and pretend that everything was fine and nothing was happening. And that actually carried into my adulthood. Is how I spent most of my life, just trying to be normal and not let anybody see what a wreck I was. Basically, what a fucking red hot mess I was, really. The shame was such a powerful motivator for hiding what had happened. And because of that, it wasn't until I was almost 30 that I began to understand the full extent of how those early experiences had affected me, the impact that they had had on me. And I only became aware of it because I just reached a point in my life where I realized that there was no running away from what had happened. And as much as I would have preferred to keep it all packed in a tiny box way in the back of my mind, and that was definitely my preferred option, it just got to a point where there was almost no choice. I had to face it if I wanted to stop surviving and start living, and if I wanted to have any shot at finding some kind of inner peace. Because for me, not dealing with it didn't solve anything. It didn't stop the anxiety. It didn't change my PTSD symptoms. It didn't make me want to take care of myself. There is a great quote I heard that I think sums it up pretty well. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And that was kind of it in a nutshell. There was just almost no choice. So I began to do the work. I dove right in, and until relatively recently, I didn't fully appreciate, even with that work, I still didn't fully appreciate the toll that the abuse had taken on my relationship to my physical body and the way that I was treating myself, and actually how much work there was still to do. I kind of thought that I had covered most of it back then. And not that I was done, but that the bulk of the work had been achieved. But I've come to realize that was really just the first round of deep healing, and there's still more important layers to peel back. Because really what I came to see is that I had this belief system. What I learned growing up is that overweight equals out of sight, and out of sight equals safety. So basically what I found about myself is that I'm not this weight because I want to be. I'm this weight because it makes me feel safe. And you know what? I fucking hate that. I really fucking hate that. What happens is, during bursts of good health, in my adult life, when I am super active and I'm in shape and my energy is good and I'm proud of the way I look, then I would receive some attention. Not a great deal, just, some occasional compliments that everybody gets. You look nice today, this kind of thing. And the hard thing about that for me is that you can't control where attention comes from. And that's scary. That feels a little bit threatening because, historically getting attention didn't really work out so well for me. So I will go from taking great care of myself, feeling really good, to, stress eating. Then I would feel too sluggish and too gross to be active. My gut health deteriorates from all of the crappy processed foods that I start to eat, all the sugary drinks. That in turn then just spikes my anxiety because of, the poor gut health, and it causes all kinds of brain fog and physical discomfort. And it's hell. It sucks, and I never enjoy it. But as they say, we always prefer a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven, which is why I've kept myself locked in this cycle of, nurture and then neglect, and haven't really been able to, sustain good health and well-being for, quite honestly, longer than a few months is maybe the most I can manage. I always get close and I always start to feel like I'm really about to break through and, have this big change and shift into a healthier lifestyle and be where I want to be. But then I will, out of nowhere, just seem to flip-flop back into this old patterns, old cycles, into this unhelpful state of being. But now, finally, I've come to a point in my journey, in my life, where I feel like I've collected enough good tools and resources and have the right support to pull back this next layer. And so I'm finally going to do something about the flip-flopping once and for all. The next step in my recovery from SA trauma is taking back ownership of my body by smashing apart this fucking pattern, hopefully once and for all. No more bursts of good health followed by long periods of weight gain and digestive issues and feeling bloated and feeling crappy. I haven't wanted to have my photo taken for years, and that sucks. I'm not going to be young and bodacious forever. I would like to enjoy it while I can. Fear has been in the driver's seat for just a bit too long, and it's time I stop believing all of the shit that my inner critic says. This year, I'm breaking the cycle by changing my relationship with food, with exercise, and with my body. This is not a quick fix. This is not like I'm going to be done in 6 weeks situation. The remainder of the year is just the first step to change this. This is a whole lifestyle change. So the goal is to be in the body that makes me feel happy by Christmas, but more importantly, to learn how to be consistent with the self-care practices by diving deep into these wounds and these core beliefs that have, kept me stuck for so long. one of my biggest fears is of being seen, and try as I might, it's not something I can think my way out of. And I have given it a pretty bloody good crack, but I can't think my way out of this one. So it seems to only make sense that I should document this journey and put it on YouTube. Something that changed for me recently, just this year, is a recurring dream that I've had since I was a teenager. During the worst years of my CPTSD, I started to develop 3 recurring nightmares, and one of them, my least favorite, was a dream about my childhood home. I would dream that I would be trapped inside of the house, and it would be grimy and dirty and full of monsters. The circumstances were always a little bit different, but the theme was always the same. You know, I would be trapped in the house with my demons, and it would be filthy and gross, and I wouldn't be able to get out. I wouldn't even be able to get it to a window to escape. For the first maybe 6-7 years, the dreams came pretty consistently, you know, almost weekly. But as I started to grow and repair and to feel a little more stability, the dreams slowed down. They started coming only when I was really stressed out, and I noticed they even began to change. You know, in the beginning, I couldn't do anything to get out of the house. But then over time, the more stability I started to feel, I would be able to like escape the house. I could open up a window and I could get into my backyard, or I could escape to my neighbors, or I could, you know, run around the block. And that would be amazing. And then when I was 30, when I started to really finally investigate the grape trauma, and I began to work with a therapist, and I was working with other modalities. I was doing lots of yoga and breath work, and I worked with psychedelics. That shifted the dreams in a massive way. Not long after I did that deep work, I had a dream that I was back in the house, and there was not a single monster in it, not a creepy face. They were all gone, and I could leave. The house was still really grimy and really dirty, but it was empty. It was empty, and I could walk out of it. And I even dreamt that I walked out of the house and I got in a car and left, drove off into the sunset kind of thing. And it was amazing. It was so liberating, and it really was a reflection of where I was at in life because of finally addressing the trauma. You know, I felt so liberated and so freed. And over the years, the nightmare, it's interesting because it just became a dream that I started to learn how to use, how to help me to navigate, you know, what was happening inside of my internal landscape, you know, with my experience. Until recently, just earlier this year, a few weeks ago, it had been about 3 years since I had dreamt of my childhood home. And then one night a few weeks ago, I was back at the house in the dream, and I was standing in my backyard, and the back door was open and the front door of the house was open, and I had the wide open, and I had the sense that I could just walk through. There was no fear of being trapped in the house. I felt like I was free to just move right through, or not even enter it if I wished. I did decide to go into the house, and I noticed right away that it wasn't quite as grimy, you know, the way that it used to be. All of the furniture had been pulled away from the walls, and I noticed as I was walking through the house that, you know, along one of the skirting boards there was some mold. I also felt the presence of my dad inside of the house, and he was inviting me to pick any color I wanted to paint the walls. When I woke up, I was shocked. I just couldn't believe how free I felt, how much agency had come into my life. But more than that, I was blown away by the fact that I could actually change the house. And I took it to be a really good sign. I shared it later on with my therapist, and she agreed. Her perspective, or her interpretation, was that the house is me, and that pulling the furniture away from the walls, that's something that we all need to do to let the sunlight in, because, you know, without maintenance, the mold starts to grow. It's that sort of metaphorical symbol of the upkeep we all need to do. But really, what had inspired me the most about my conversation with her was this revelation that I could heal and create in ways that I literally never thought possible, ways I never, no pun intended, but never dreamed possible. I believed that, I had always believed that the best I could achieve was, this sense of freedom where I was still tethered to the house, but, the demons weren't there and it was still grimy and gloomy, but, it was open, and that was the best I was going to do, that I would always be sort of stuck with this little grimy, gloomy house that's never quite clean. And in some ways, that is true, because the house is a symbol, but it also actually existed. And in my subconscious mind, that house represents a part of my past that I will never be able to change or erase, no matter how much I would like to get rid of it. And, that's okay. The house is woven into the fabric of my story, and it's something that I've made peace with. But the way that the house looks and feels, that's a reflection of how I've felt about myself as a consequence of the trauma that I experienced. That's the part of myself, or part of my story, that I do have control over. And, really more so than I thought was possible. I'm not stuck with the sad little house. In the dream that I had a few weeks ago, I was invited to choose what color I wanted to paint the house. And before I spoke to my therapist, I was really, really excited, because I was like, I couldn't wait to think about that and, bring some life back into the house and brighten it and paint it, so to speak. But after my conversation with her, now I kind of feel like fuck that. Dressing up the house is, maybe that's not what I want actually. Maybe what I want to do is just set it on fire and start from scratch and reimagine myself to be anything that I want to be, the thing that I actually have always wanted to be. I'm in love with Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Zen master, and he has this really, really beautiful quote about the Buddha. If you don't know him, he was a Zen master. He passed away a few years ago, and he looked just like Yoda from Star Wars, and he was very sweet and soft-spoken and very wise. And he said that accepting your body is a very important practice. You are already beautiful as you are. You don't have to be anyone else. When you can accept your body and make peace with your body, you have a chance to see your body as a home. You have peace, you have warmth, and you have joy. Building a true home within feels wonderful. This to me means taking an honest look at all of the crap that I've hoarded in my metaphorical house, and how it still reflects the past rather than the way I want to live, or even how I feel right now. That I actually do already have a wonderful home. I just need to appreciate it and care for it, and maybe update the software about what caring for my body looks like. That changing my lifestyle is about self-love and about caring for my home and treating it as something precious and valuable, which it is, and so is yours. This next chapter is about burning the house down to build a home instead. And I don't mean burning it down out of anger, out of rage or vengeance or anything like that. I mean setting it on fire as a way of letting it go. That therapeutic cleansing, the cathartic release of just sort of burning it to free it and to release it, to let the light in. This is a gift to my 20-year-old self who felt like she was batshit crazy and totally alone. And this is something that I want to share, both because it helps me push that edge of that comfort zone of being seen, but also because unfortunately I know now that I'm very much not alone, and I've never been alone in this pain or in these feelings. And as much as I would like to go about this quietly and privately and fall on my face without anybody looking, I know that there's only so much healing that you can do by yourself, and the rest you need to do with others, and that it is time to come out of isolation. I'm sharing this journey to reclaim my body, my health, my inner peace, for anybody else who has also had to cope in silence, and or maybe just wondered, why does it just feel so fucking hard sometimes? This is the opportunity. This is what subscribe, share your comments, share what you feel comfortable with about where you're at in your journey. I would be so curious to know if there's anybody else out there who has also learned something from their dreams or seen them change across time, whether it is changing in their frequency or what you're actually experiencing inside of the dream. I would love to hear from you. Through this process, I will also be sharing my goals, all of the tools, all of the resources, and the things that I'm learning as I move forward, but also everything that got me to this point. What worked, what wasn't useful, what I would have done better, how I navigated relationships as I was healing. And, hopefully you'll find something that is inspirational, or some tips that, might save you some time, especially if you're early on in your journey to recovery from SA trauma. But at the very least, my hope is that you'll find a warm and supportive community, that we might be going to different places, but maybe we can get there together. So thank you so much for your time and for your company and for your presence.